Lights hung low over the stage, their warmth barely penetrating the chill that wrapped around George Strait's heart. This charity concert was like countless others he had played, the exhilarating rush of a live audience, the thrill of music pulsing in the air. Yet as he strummed the opening chords of his latest song, a familiar emptiness weighed on him, settling heavily in his chest. The crowd swayed, spellbound by the notes, but he felt miles away, tethered to shadows of regret. He finished the set to roaring applause, though the sound felt distant, muted as if encased in glass. As George bowed, his fingers left the guitar strings and found only a fleeting satisfaction. With each encouraging cheer, he smiled politely, but inside, his heart was a battlefield, torn between the joy of performance and the hollowness of unfulfilled connections. Once backstage, George stepped off into the half-light, the vibrant laughter of his bandmates suddenly dulled. He watched as they celebrated another successful show, but he couldn't shake the weight of loneliness that had shrouded him since he'd lost his best friend. Memories of laughter shared and late-night conversations echoed in his mind, haunting reminders of the relationships he had neglected, drowned in the pursuit of fame. As he walked down the narrow corridor lined with equipment cases and stage props, his thoughts spiraled. Had the music truly brought him happiness, or had it driven a wedge between him and those he loved? The storm brewed outside, lightning illuminating the clouds, mirroring the chaos within him. Just then, he heard a muffled sound, a sob, breaking through his reverie. Curiosity piqued, he turned towards the source, moving cautiously toward a dimly lit corner. There, huddled against the wall, sat a young boy, drenched in tears, his small frame trembling. George's heart ached at the sight. "Hey, kid," he said softly, kneeling to be at eye level. "What's going on?" The boy, maybe 12, looked up, his dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. I can't do this anymore," he choked out, his voice shaky. "My family doesn't have money for my dreams. My shoes are falling apart." He pointed helplessly at the worn-out sneakers that barely held together. An overwhelming wave of empathy surged through George, washing over him in a torrent of recognition. How many times had he felt that same sense of defeat, that same longing? As an aspiring musician himself, he had endured struggles that had nearly consumed him. He wished he could lift this weight from Miguel's shoulders to show him there was hope, but the words stuck in his throat. "Listen, Miguel," George said gently, softening at the sight of the boy's distress. "I know it's tough, but music, it can take you places. You just have to hold on to that dream, even when it feels impossible." Miguel's shoulders sagged, his gaze dropping to the ground. "But how? I don't have the tools. I can't even afford new shoes." George reached out, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. A small gesture, yet meaningful. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering against the roof, and he felt a deep pang in his heart. He wanted to list solutions to Miguel's struggles, to promise him a path forward, but too often he had struggled to find his way, forgetting those who meant the most. Instead, he simply sat down beside Miguel, letting silence envelop them, understanding that sometimes no words could mend broken spirits. They shared this moment of despair, the weight of their fears aligning under that flickering backstage light. As the storm raged outside, George realized he was not just an observer of Miguel's pain. He was a fellow traveler on a road laced with hope and fear. And in that small shared silence, perhaps together they could find a way to navigate through their storms. Time felt distorted as George sat in that dimly lit corner with Miguel, the storm outside a backdrop to the tempest within him. Each raindrop struck like a reminder of the emotional storms he had navigated through his life, a life anchored in music, yet nevertheless strewn with shadows of lost relationships. In the silence shared with the boy, his mind began to drift back to the early days, where hope intertwined effortlessly with dreams. Flashbacks emerged, vivid and melodic, bringing forth a simpler time when laughter mingled with the twang of a guitar. He was just a boy from Petite, Texas, chasing the rhythm of his heart amidst summers filled with barbecues and bonfires. The smell of smoky cedar lingered as he recalled nights spent under the stars, strumming chords with friends. Each session had sprung laughter and camaraderie, moments that now felt achingly distant. He remembered the faces, bright with youth and dreams. There was Benny, always the jokester, a guitar slung across his shoulder, harmonizing every punchline, and Lisa, whose voice could shatter glass, enveloping the small town in melodies that seemed to bounce off the dusty roads. They all believed they would go far. They believed they were invincible. But life unfolded differently. The fame that had come so early, the tours and late-night shows, it all began to shift his focus away from what truly mattered. He had been riding on waves of success when Benny passed away unexpectedly. George had been in the middle of a recording session when he received the news, a sudden absence that shattered his world. He hadn't been there for his friend in his final moments, too consumed by the demands of a growing career. That haunting regret had punctured the fabric of his being, turning joyful melodies into painful refrains. Now, as he sat with Miguel, memories filled with regret cascaded down like the rain outside, each droplet becoming a poignant reminder of what he had lost. He was brought back to the present as the boy shifted his weight beside him, breaking the silence. "Do you think I can really make it?" Miguel asked, looking up with a glimmer of hope that flickered in the pale light. George felt a weight settle in his chest. He remembered the moments when he too had clung to hope amidst doubt. "You have to believe you can," he replied, his voice steady. "It won't always be easy, kid, but if you want something bad enough, you have to keep pushing." Miguel nodded slowly, his expression shifting from despair to determination. George could see the fight sparking in the boy's eyes, a fire ignited by the very words he had longed to hear. But beyond the budding enthusiasm, George sensed the weight of responsibility that came with mentorship, one he had failed to embrace fully in his past. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, George found himself drawn deeper into the world of Miguel's music. They would meet often, huddled in corners of quiet cafes or under stars that twinkled above Texas' vast horizon, sharing secrets, stories, and songs. Miguel's rhythm began to intertwine with George's heart, and through him George unearthed forgotten layers of himself. Rita, his friend and publicist, kept a watchful eye, sensing George's struggles and triumphs. "You're really taking a shine to that kid, aren't you?" she teased during one of their discussions after a concert. "Yeah, he reminds me of, well, me," George admitted, his tone laced with nostalgia. "He's got that spark. It's like I'm reliving all those dreams I once had." Rita raised an eyebrow, encouraging him to dig deeper. "You know, sometimes the support we offer others can come back and heal us. Have you thought about how helping him might help you?" George pondered her words, quiet during those moments of revelations. It was all too clear. In stepping into the light for Miguel, perhaps he could also step into a light he thought had long flickered out. Yet with every song they wrote, every chord strummed, he battled not just shadows but the growing anxiety of whether he could be the mentor Miguel desperately needed. Sometimes, during their late-night sessions, George would catch himself staring at Miguel, who played with a passion that was unbecoming of his age. In those moments, the boy's laughter rang clear, and George was reminded of the warmth of friendship, the joy of unyielding faith in dreams, a connection he swore to protect. One particular evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the Texas sky in brilliant hues, George felt a flicker of something he thought he might have lost forever: hope. They sat on George's porch, strumming gently beneath the fading light, creating music that danced through the twilight. George closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him, and realized here, in this raw moment, lay the roots of a new beginning. With every song that flowed from their fingers, George could almost hear his old friends cheering them on. He breathed in the evening air, rich with possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, he found peace amid the memories that haunted him, an understanding that sometimes in mentoring others, we find the pathway to healing ourselves. And with that, the storm outside began to ebb, and he and Miguel continued strumming chords that resonated deep within their hearts, a melody springing forth from the elders' lessons and the young boy's dreams alike. As weeks turned into months, George found comfort in sharing music with Miguel. The boy's passion blossomed, yet George sensed an undercurrent of doubt threading through their sessions. Each strum and lyric revealed Miguel's excitement, yet a flicker of insecurity lingered in his young eyes. The pressures of pursuit blended with the shadows of George's own past, leading to a battle between encouragement and self-doubt. One evening, under a fading sun, they practiced together until twilight turned the sky a deep indigo. Miguel was preparing for a local music festival and had poured his heart into a song about chasing dreams. As they sat on George's porch, Miguel nervously adjusted his guitar. "Do you think I'll be good enough?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. George turned to him, empathy swelling within. "You've got talent, Miguel. Just let the music guide you," he assured. But doubt clawed at George's thoughts as he reflected on his own path. He remembered his early days filled with laughter and music, but shadowed by heartbreak and loss. Memories of his best friend Benny flashed through his mind, a friendship lost to ambition, a darkness he still struggled to shake. At the festival, Miguel took the stage, his young frame silhouetted against the golden light. George watched, pride swelling, but fear sank its claws in deeper with every note the boy played. Miguel's song filled the air with emotion, yet George felt as though it echoed his own fears of inadequacy and failure, memories of lost friendships and the price of ambition resonating painfully within him. After Miguel finished, the applause roared. Excitement mingled with dread within George. When Miguel returned, flushed with exhilaration yet teetering on uncertainty, George could see the conflict in his eyes. "Did I do okay?" Miguel asked, optimism wavering in his voice. "You were fantastic," George replied, masking his own doubts. But as the night set in, he couldn't shake the feeling of shared vulnerability. In the days that followed, George noticed Miguel's light beginning to dim. The young boy, once filled with dreams, sat silently, his fingers grazing the guitar strings without conviction. In an attempt to reach out, George decided they should talk. "Miguel, are you okay?" he asked one quiet afternoon as they strummed together. Miguel's gaze fell to the floor. "I don't think I'm good enough," he confessed, his body tight with worry. "What if I let everyone down?" George felt those words resonate within, amplifying the loneliness and regrets he had tucked away for years. "I've felt that way too," he admitted. "I lost my friend because I didn't prioritize what mattered, and it haunts me. But those feelings, they're part of us." As Miguel processed this revelation, George understood that his own battles had resurfaced through the boy's struggle. He saw in Miguel not just a mentee, but a mirror reflecting his own fears and insecurities. "Miguel, you're opening up in your music. Sharing who you are, that's what counts. It's okay to stumble, it helps craft your story," George reassured him, pulling him closer as the air thickened with emotion. The two sat in silence, the weight of their shared vulnerabilities heavy around them. George started to strum gently and sang an old song about overcoming loss, inviting Miguel to join in. The melody hung in the air, weaving their stories together, a catalyst for healing both through music and connection. As they played, George felt a flicker of hope, intertwining with the lingering shadows. He realized that in mentoring Miguel, he was also traversing the path of his own redemption. They were a duo battling storms together, faces illuminated by the bond being forged through their shared struggles. After that moment, George made a silent commitment to himself. He wouldn't let Miguel hang in uncertainty. Together, they would face every lingering fear, turn doubts into melodies, and let music be the bridge that healed their hearts. The night settled around them as the stars emerged, and George found solace, knowing that in embracing vulnerability, they could carve out a path to resilience for themselves. The sun rose with unyielding warmth, spilling across Texas like liquid gold, illuminating the doubts that had weighed heavily on George and Miguel. In the weeks that followed their heartfelt conversation, a transformation quietly blossomed. Their sessions now echoed with newfound energy, a promise of rebirth threading through every note they played together. George had begun to prioritize Miguel's journey, stepping into his role as a mentor with a deeper sense of purpose. Each morning, they gathered on the porch, the guitar resting comfortably in Miguel's lap. The air was thick with the scent of sweetgrass and blooming wildflowers, as if even nature itself was urging them forward. George could feel the weight slowly lifting off Miguel's shoulders, the boy's laughter returning like a long-lost friend. "Let's write something that reflects how far we've come," George suggested one afternoon, the sun dipping low, casting elongated shadows across the porch. Miguel's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Like a song about perseverance?" "Exactly." George smiled warmly, strumming a few chords that resonated with hope. "Let's celebrate every stumble and every victory along the way." As they worked, melodies flowed like honey, the air surrounding them alive with creativity. Song after song poured from their hearts, becoming a tapestry of narratives woven with threads of struggle and triumph. George began to notice something shift in Miguel. The boy was gaining confidence. Each note played a testament to his resilience. One evening, the moon hung low and full, bathing their surroundings in silvery light. Miguel tilted his head back, watching the stars twinkle as if whispering secrets. "Do you ever feel afraid to share your music?" he asked, breaking the silence. George paused, the air thick with contemplation. "Every time I step on stage," he chuckled nervously. "But what I've come to realize is that fear doesn't define us. It's how we face it that matters." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "You make me feel like I can conquer anything," he said, a hint of vulnerability surfacing. George placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "And you can. Just like I had to learn to believe in myself, so do you. We're in this together." Their bond deepened in those moments, transcending mere mentorship. Music became their shared language, a lifeline to navigate the complexities of life and their emotions. Every note they played echoed a promise, one of resilience, hope, and unwavering support. The following weekend, George received an invitation from a local music festival, a chance to participate in a mentorship program that showcased young talent. In an exhilarating moment, he decided to bring Miguel along, finally presenting the opportunity for him to play on a larger stage. As they prepared, anxiety coiled in George's stomach. "What if I'm not good enough?" he thought, memories of past failures creeping into his mind. But Miguel, sensing the tension, turned to him, his face filled with determination. "We can do this," he said firmly. Once at the festival, George watched Miguel interact with other aspiring musicians. The boy seemed to blossom among them, each conversation a spark igniting his confidence. As the time for their performance approached, George's heart raced, echoing the rhythm of 1,000 possibilities. "Are you ready?" he asked Miguel as they stood behind the curtain, shadows of anticipation dancing with them. With a resolute nod, Miguel adjusted his guitar strap. More than ever, as they stepped onto the stage, the spotlight enveloped them, the audience a sea of faces eager for the music. Miguel took a breath, scanning the crowd, and George felt an overwhelming wave of protectiveness wash over him. He remembered all the times he had felt alone and afraid, and it became his mission to ensure Miguel surpassed those hurdles. Without looking back, they began to play their chosen song, a lyrical ode to resilience and hope, a celebration of their journey together. As the melody wrapped around them, Miguel's voice rang out, clear and powerful, filling the space with raw emotion. George harmonized smoothly, their voices blending like the sweet rays of dawn. The performance resonated beyond the stage. Audience members swayed to the rhythm, some wiping tears, others smiling warmly. The message of hope transcended age, background, and circumstance, and George felt himself swept up in the collective energy. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing like distant thunder when they finished. But George couldn't focus on the applause. He looked over at Miguel, whose face radiated with sheer joy, the spark of his dreams igniting fully in that moment. As they exited the stage, Miguel was beaming, and George wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "You were unbelievable out there," he exclaimed, his heart swelling with pride. "Thank you for believing in me," Miguel said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." In that moment, George felt something shift within him. He wasn't simply a mentor. He had become a part of something larger. Through supporting Miguel, he had regained parts of himself he thought lost amid the shadows. The duo spent the evening celebrating, surrounded by other performers and music lovers celebrating their own passions. As they laughed under the stars, George noticed a stranger approaching them, a man with weathered skin and a guitar slung over his shoulder. "I just wanted to say how much your performance touched me," the man said, his voice trembling with sincerity. "You made me believe in dreams again." George exchanged a glance with Miguel, the weight of the man's words profound. It was then that George understood. Music's true power lay in its ability to connect, heal, and inspire. That night, Miguel leaned back, looking at the stars, a newfound fire kindling within him. "I feel like I can really chase my dreams now," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "Of course you can," George replied, clarity illuminating his own heart. "This is only the beginning." In the quiet of the night, George realized they had woven a new narrative, one rooted in forgiveness, redemption, and the infinite bonds of music. As they left the stage behind them, two souls intertwined, they stepped forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by hope and the healing power of their shared journey. The thrill of the festival hung in the air, like the last notes of a captivating song, echoing a promise that lingered long after the applause faded. George found solace in Miguel's burgeoning passion, a fresh hope blossoming in the wake of their success. Yet with the exhilaration came a growing fear, stealthily wrapping itself around his heart as he watched Miguel pursue his dreams. In the weeks that followed their unforgettable performance, Miguel immersed himself in music, eager to seize every opportunity that came his way. He strived to perfect his craft, taking gigs at local venues, joining open mic nights, and even recording songs for a demo. Each step forward illuminated the fierce determination in Miguel's spirit, but for George, each success stirred a whirlwind of doubt, a haunting anxiety he could not shake. One warm evening, with a sky painted in hues of gold and lavender, George found himself watching Miguel practice a new song in the backyard. The boy's fingers glided over the guitar strings effortlessly, and yet George felt a pang of fear rising in his chest. What if Miguel faced rejection? What if this journey altered him in ways he could not foresee? "Miguel," George hesitated before speaking, "what do you really want out of this?" Startled, Miguel stopped playing, furrowing his brow as he considered the question. "I want to share my music with the world. I want to connect with people just like you do," he replied, his voice brimming with conviction. George smiled, but the nagging doubt lingered, whispering warnings of potential pitfalls. The music business was fraught with challenges, and he couldn't help but envision the ghosts of his past, friends lost to ambition, and the haunting specter of unmet expectations. It weighed heavily on his heart. As the date for Miguel's next performance approached, an opportunity to play at a well-known venue in town, George felt the familiar tide of panic creep in. He was riddled with apprehension as he prepared to support Miguel, wondering if he could protect the young artist from the risks he himself had faced in his pursuit of success. On the night of the performance, George stood backstage, his heart pounding from a mix of excitement and dread. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, the excitement alive all around him. Yet he felt himself slipping, unmoored by emotions, as he watched Miguel prepare to step into the spotlight. "Are you ready?" George asked, trying to mask his worry. "More than ever," Miguel exclaimed, his eyes shining bright with determination. As the audience welcomed Miguel onto the stage, the crowd erupted into cheers. George's heart swelled with pride, but as he watched, his mind began racing through the what-ifs that crowded his thoughts. What if he falters? What if this moment becomes too much for him? Miguel strummed the opening chords, a wave of sound cascading from his guitar, inviting the crowd into his world. George stood in the shadows, spellbound by the performance, yet consumed by anxiety as he forced himself to remain focused. He reminded himself that Miguel's journey was not his alone to navigate, but as the notes weaved into a tapestry of sound, George felt the tight grip of fear clutching his chest. The performance was resonating, but memories flooded back. His own fears, the losses he had endured, the moments of failure that lingered like phantoms. He felt an overwhelming urge to protect Miguel from those shadows, knowing too well how they could engulf aspirations whole. When the set concluded, thunderous applause echoed throughout the venue, a cascade of affirmation resonating into the night. George clenched his fists, exhilaration mingling with dread as Miguel stepped off the stage glowing with triumph. "You were incredible," George exclaimed, barely containing his joy as he embraced Miguel, but doubt lingered beneath the surface. "I can't believe how well you handled that." Miguel smiled widely, but as the excitement settled, he hesitated. "What if I can't keep this up?" he asked, vulnerability surfacing with the weight of expectation. "What if they don't love my music next time?" George's heart ached at those words, as they echoed back to his own fears. "Every artist faces uncertainty, Miguel," he said softly. "It's part of the journey. What matters is that you find your voice and stay true to it. Trust in yourself just like I trust you." As Miguel absorbed the advice, George noticed something in the boy's eyes, a flicker of understanding, a sense of clarity blooming in the depths of his youthful spirit. "I understand now," Miguel said slowly. "I have to embrace the journey for what it is, not just focus on how it ends." Their conversation drifted into the night, the celebration around them a distant rumble. George felt a profound shift between them, a shared understanding and acknowledgement of the struggles that accompanied every musician's path. With a newfound sense of reassurance, Miguel turned to George, a heartfelt request forming in his eyes. "Will you perform with me next time? I want to share that stage with you. It would mean so much." George hesitated, each heartbeat loud in his ears. The opportunity frightened him, a test of faith that demanded he confront his own fears. But in that moment, he made a choice. "Absolutely," he replied with a genuine smile. "I'd be honored to share the stage with you." The path ahead was still fraught with uncertainties, yet George understood that by stepping into the spotlight alongside Miguel, he could finally embrace the healing power of music for both of them. He would let go of the shadows that haunted him and walk arm in arm with the young artist, ready to face the challenges awaiting them. As they left the venue, the cool evening air filled with laughter and music, George realized that they would forge their own paths together. The transformative journey ahead was interconnected, a bond strengthened through the honest vulnerability of sharing their stories, a reminder that the test of faith was not just a solitary endeavor, but a dance of unity. Together, they embraced the unfolding road, hands held tight, ready to create the music of their lives, weaving hope and resilience into every note and every lyric. The days turned into weeks as George and Miguel prepared for their upcoming performance together. Each practice session was filled with laughter, occasional missteps, and the thrill of creativity spilling forth. With every strum of the guitar and every shared lyric, their bond deepened, weaving a rich tapestry of trust and resilience. Still, George could feel the shadow of anxiety lurking just beneath the surface. The night of their performance at the renowned venue drew closer, and George's heart raced in rhythm with Miguel's enthusiasm. Posters adorned the walls, and the smell of popcorn and excitement mingled in the air, charging the atmosphere with anticipation. Yet deep down, George felt the weight of expectation resting heavily on his shoulders, the fear of letting Miguel down. As they stood backstage, Miguel paced back and forth, his excitement infectious. "I can't wait to show everyone what we've been working on," he exclaimed, adjusting the collar of his shirt and smoothing his hair back. "You're going to knock them off their feet," George replied, trying to match Miguel's enthusiasm. But despite the encouragement, a knot tightened in George's stomach. "Just remember to breathe. Enjoy the moment." "Yeah, I will," Miguel shot back with a wide grin. The boy's energy was like a beacon of light, illuminating George's more somber thoughts. But for George, the stakes felt higher than ever. As they stepped onto the stage, the lights flooded over them, illuminating the crowd, which buzzed with excitement. George could see faces filled with anticipation. Some were friends, others strangers, every pair of eyes fixed on the duo standing before them. Miguel took a deep breath, and George could feel the tremor of his nerves. "Are you ready?" he whispered, unsure whether it was Miguel or himself he was asking. "For us," Miguel replied with a confident smile that almost shook the fear from George's heart. "Let's do this." They began their set with an original song they had crafted together, a melody filled with hope and authenticity, a reflection of their shared journey up until this moment. Miguel's voice rose strong and clear, and George harmonized, anchoring the sound as it echoed through the venue. The connection they forged with the audience was palpable. George could see them swaying, becoming lost in the music. Yet with every smile from the crowd, George felt the weight on his heart intensifying. Memories of his past failures whispered in his mind, taunting him. Midway through their performance, Miguel stumbled on a lyric, a moment of hesitation that sent a wave of panic rushing through George. What if this was it? What if the lights dimmed and shadows overwhelmed everything they had built? George quickly reached over, giving Miguel a reassuring nod, and when he resumed singing, Miguel took a breath and found his footing again. Together they played on, deepening their connection through each note, reclaiming the sense of purpose that sparked their bond. Yet, toward the end of the set, the tension in George's chest threatened to overflow. The room reverberated with emotion, but doubt began to claw at him, gnawing at the edges of their success. He could sense the crowd buoying Miguel's spirit, but he felt disconnected, adrift in his own insecurities. As they cued the final song, George paused for a moment, vulnerability washing over him. All he had fought to overcome seemed to crest like a wave in his mind, threatening to take him under. Yet he looked over at Miguel, who was smiling, a warm light radiating from him. In that moment, George realized that he was not just a mentor but also a participant. He had to step forward, to reclaim his own faith in the music they shared. "Miguel," George murmured when the final notes lingered in the air, "let's make this last song count. This is our story." Miguel nodded, his eyes glimmering with understanding. Together they played a song that encapsulated their journey, the battles, the victories, the moments of doubt, and the strength they discovered in one another. As the music swelled, George surrendered to the rhythm, his fears dissolving in the embrace of the notes. The audience became a sea of echoes and applause, a force lifting them beyond their worries. Every chord they struck resonated with purpose, telling their truth. When they finished, the crowd erupted, their applause crashing like waves against the shore. George felt a flood of gratitude wash over him as he locked eyes with Miguel. The boy's joy shone brightly, his smile a reflection of the triumph they had achieved together. As they stepped off the stage, adrenaline coursed through their veins, their hearts much lighter than when they had entered. Friends and supporters greeted them, showering them with congratulations. But even amid the celebration, George felt a shift within himself. The ghosts of his insecurities had faded, and his heart brimmed with renewed faith in the journey they had embarked upon. "Well done, you two," a familiar voice cut through the chatter. It was the man from the festival, standing amidst the crowd. "That was incredible. You made me feel something tonight." "Thank you," Miguel exclaimed, his enthusiasm infectious. George looked at Miguel, realizing the truth that had blossomed between them. Their connection was more than just mentorship. It was a partnership rooted in shared experiences, mutual support, and a love for music. In the days that followed, that sense of connection only deepened as they shared other performances and emboldened each other to tackle new challenges. The music industry was a labyrinth filled with uncertainties, but together they faced the winding paths and intricate turns with courage. George had let the shadows fade, allowing light to seep into the corners of his heart. He had reclaimed not just his role as a mentor, but also a piece of his soul as a musician. And Miguel, with his unwavering spirit, reminded George of the power of resilience and the beauty inherent in the journey. As they crossed the threshold of uncertainty, they found harmony in their shared music, a melody that resonated far beyond the confines of any stage, a testament to their triumphs, their truth, and their inseparable bond, growing stronger note by note. As the months passed, George and Miguel solidified their connection through countless performances, navigating the ups and downs of the music industry side by side. Each show strengthened their bond. They learned from one another, growing not just as artists but as friends. George found himself invigorated by Miguel's enthusiasm and energy, each rehearsal breathing new life into his own creative spirit. One balmy autumn evening, George received an unexpected call from a talent agency. "We've been hearing amazing things about Miguel," the voice on the line excitedly shared. "We want him to showcase his talent. This could really launch his career." George's heart raced with excitement. This was the moment they had longed for, but with it came a heavy sense of responsibility. He felt the burden of ensuring Miguel was ready for such a significant opportunity. "Miguel!" George called, searching for him among the sounds of practicing guitars. When he found him, Miguel looked up, brow furrowed. "We've been offered a showcase with a talent agency," George announced, barely able to conceal his excitement. Miguel's face lit up at the news, though George could sense a flicker of doubt behind his elation. "A showcase? What if I mess it up?" George stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Miguel's shoulder. "Remember what we've talked about. This journey is about authenticity. You've worked hard for this moment. Trust in yourself." The boost of confidence Miguel needed sparked back to life. "Okay, I'll give it my all," he grinned, determination flashing in his eyes. The weeks leading up to the showcase were filled with intense rehearsals and late-night jam sessions. They poured their hearts into crafting a setlist that felt genuine and connected them deeply. With every note, George felt invigorated, rediscovering the pure joy of creating music alongside the young prodigy. When the night of the showcase finally arrived, George's nerves washed over him as he entered the venue. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, and as the crowd filled the seats, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and fear. This was Miguel's moment, and yet the memories of past failures haunted him. As Miguel stepped onto the stage, lights beaming down, George held his breath, staring into the brightened crowd. Miguel had transformed from a timid dreamer into a confident performer, and George felt pride swell within him. Miguel took the mic and began to sing, his voice radiating warmth and sincerity. The audience swayed, fully engaged in the story he shared through music. George watched, unable to shake the feeling of vulnerability as Miguel's confidence blossomed under the spotlight. As they reached the final song, Miguel's energy drew the crowd into a collective experience, a journey marked by hope, truth, a connection amplified by music. The applause that followed was thunderous, reverberating through George like waves cascading over a shore. Stepping off the stage, Miguel's face glowed with exhilaration, and tears brimmed in George's eyes. Members of the audience rushed forward, congratulating the young artist, showering him with praise. George joined the celebration, feeling gratitude wash over him. "Miguel, you were incredible," George exclaimed, wrapping an arm around the boy's shoulders. "You owned that stage. I couldn't have done this without you." Miguel's response was heartfelt, and in that moment, George knew their journey had transformed both of them. As they stepped outside, cool night air wrapped around them, perfumed with the scent of success. They stood together in the glow of streetlights, laughter mingling with whispers of dreams fulfilled. In that shared space, George understood that Miguel had reignited his own passion for music, teaching him that their connection was more profound than mentorship. It was partnership grounded in resilience, trust, and a love for their craft. They had both learned valuable lessons about vulnerability and the beauty of interconnected journeys. As Miguel's youthful laughter filled the night, George felt a deep sense of fulfillment wash over him, promising a future where their stories continued to intertwine. Together, they were ready to embrace whatever challenges awaited, forging ahead into uncharted territory, united by the transformative power of their music. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one of hope, creativity, and unwavering friendship.